It is now evening, Maddrift. As you might have guessed by my voice, I am Judge Tolphier, recently re-elected to keep my position as Judge of Maddrift. I thank all of you for your votes, and I wish Maddrift luck in the future should he decide to run again in our next election, as well as luck to the rest of my competitors. Surprisingly few of you came to the official election earlier, but I understand many of us here in Maddrift have taken grieving days after recent events and were too preoccupied to attend. For those of you who were unable to attend, Maddrift was given a last-minute tally of 23 votes, and I was given a last-minute tally of an even 50. Shelley did not bring a finished draft of her one-year plan and opted to forfeit for this election, and no one else had enough votes to qualify. My plans for Maddrift include what we have been doing with the arcane lamps and sending stone system for evening narrations, but new citizen-led research as well into colouring the lamps to be more similar to the Dzivian sky rather than the blue they present as now, as well as the project of creating small food gardens under the arcane lamps all throughout Maddrift. The beginning phases of a maze between the Feasting Death's usual stalking grounds just outside of our town and Maddrift itself will begin shortly after every building finishes being remodeled. Much of the scrap from the remodeling will be repurposed into parts of the maze. A part of my plans for Maddrift that I presented for the first time during the election process were, well, let me just get into it. Given the suggestion the other evening for Queensguard training and the previous inability I expressed first here in Maddrift to officially join the Queensguard, I proposed during the election process a general town guard for Maddrift. We have citizens with us that once lived lives of adventures, as well as retired Queensguard who have been here long since before we started having active and patrolling Queensguard with us. If there is enough interest, I have devised a feasible plan to allot funds for a town guard. These will be paid positions in time, but other than those who provide training, all new recruits would be temporary interns without pay. There will be other compensation, such as food and lodging, but no pay until you officially join the guard, and there is some sort of contract and agreements written up, and we can solidify what it means to be part of Maddrift's town guard, and what it means for Maddrift to have a town guard, separate from the Queen's Guard themselves. But before I go any further, I want to thank our glorious Queen for all she's done, the Queen's Guard for keeping us safe, and the enchanters for diligently working with us along the way. I'd also like to deliver some good news that a few, not all, but a few of the arcane lamps are already undergoing the testing I mentioned earlier to be made into softer violet and grey colours rather than the blue someone called unnatural in their suggestion jar note that I read the other evening. I also want to address how I said the change in background noise is not important, but have given time to the coloration of the lighting instead. This is because I know the colour of the lamps are going to be easier to manipulate than the sound that they produce. A filter of magic can be applied to the lamps, which in the beginning phases of testing this evening in some parts of Maddrift is quite simple to uphold and to try. But a simple magical filter will not be able to adjust the already unidentified noise that accompanies the evening narration that we are just barely able to move and adjust in time to my speaking. The hums in the recording that you can all hear while I am actively speaking are entirely silent to me here in the recording box. This also makes it difficult for the enchanters to know how to adjust things quickly, and thus I still find it to be low on my list of priorities to change how loud or how suddenly the background music, noise, hums, whatever you like to call it, changes during the narration. And moving on, I hope that everyone has had ample time to say their goodbyes to the lucky children soon to depart for Queenstown, as well as any Queensguard with whom you've made friends. The wagon will leave tomorrow shortly after light rise. The enchanters who have yet to receive their items from the wagon have nothing to worry about, as your supplies are still safely locked away, and I will see them all handed out or delivered to your places of residence tomorrow before light set. Now, I have a story I would like to read from Dzivian Night Terrors this evening, but before I get into that, I want to come back to how I ended last evening's narration. I will not apologize, and I will not make excuses. We are all stressed and tired and in recovery from what happened recently, so your complaints and suggestions clashed with my own intentions and opinions, and I let myself speak relatively freely in my irritation. I am honored that I was re-elected as town judge despite, or perhaps even because, of my minor ranting. I stick by what I said and fully intend to stop shying away from confronting your opinions with my own. But I will continue to be amicable and take everything the citizens of Maddrift have to say seriously. I will not dismiss you simply because I do not agree with you, and I will not treat you with disdain no matter how I personally feel about you or your words, because it is my duty as Judge of Town Maddrift to make your lives easier and answer your questions, and to try to keep some semblance of peace. With that said, tonight I will read a story under the section called Folklore Horrors. It is titled Broken Labyrinth. Those of us who have read more history than required back in our school years might have heard of this before, but for the rest of Maddrift, I hope this is an intriguing story for you. It's a short one as well, so it should keep everyone's attention until it is finished. Here we go. Broken Labyrinth. The adventurer will never know how they found themselves inside the ruin without an entrance. The memory of their first steps within are as forgotten as the purpose of the ruins themselves and the location in which they appear. They march forward, or backwards. It is impossible to tell where they have been, as they wander deeper into the underground depths that never see the purple sky. Burning embers cast dying glows around corners, but the source of this faint illumination is never found. It simply is. Just as are the webbed and cracked stones that create the walls and tunnels of the twisting caverns, and the damp that echoes without a single drop of water ever falling to the bone-dry floor. A sound comes from behind, right over the shoulder, filling the space and one's mind. The adventurer, the guard, the local, whoever is inside, feel the whisper more than they hear it. Cold wind caresses their skin, exposed or not, and they press on in the silence that follows. Any breath that might be heard is a howling echo of distant moans, the wind breaching through where light and other people may not. With the glow always just out of clear view, the halls appearing doorless and suddenly riddled with archways that lead into even darker halls and rooms of impossible length, with or without their frost-covered floors. The traveller will eventually come to know they are not alone here. Beside their steps sit the imprints of familiar but strange marks. They take one step forward in the dust and look back to see a set of muddled tracks from two to countless wanderers. Hello? Their voice reverberates weakly in the emptiness of what once held so many warm and breathing bodies. Whatever air they inhale to breathe back out tastes sour and pre-breathed, as if nothing in here is new to them anymore. But not a single cobweb can be remembered. It is all so unwelcoming, despite the fading urge to be free of it. How did they get there? How did they get out? Neither of these things matter anymore. This is where they are, and so this is where they will be. One step at a time, or long sprints with no rest between, the lost remain lost, as they seek nothing in particular, spurred on only by a reminiscent feeling that they've been there before, and they didn't find the way out then either. Their soul hopes, perhaps, just perhaps, this time it will be different. But what time is this? Have they been here before? The person walks without knowing why they bother. Each heavy step takes an eternity as their mounting questions force them slower than they believe a person can possibly travel and still be considered to be moving forward. Are they moving forward? Have they been staring at the same glistening spiderweb just barely sparkling in the distant ember light this whole time? Or is that a new one that is stretched across an uncomfortably familiar cracked wall with water trickling silently down the stones? Is that their shadow dancing in the glow far out of reach? Or have they finally caught sight of another person? Do they want to know? Energy unlike what the adventurer has felt in a lifetime surges through them at the prospect of escape, of freedom, of being anywhere else, with the company of anyone at all that is not just themselves. They run with vigor they did not know they had. Perhaps they simply start walking again, after standing still for so long. But it feels like they fly down the hall. The corner of the endless tunnel that has stretched before them in glistening webs and snowing dust is finally coming within reach. There is a splash of footsteps, maybe their own. It is a welcome sound in the echoing silence they have grown a part of. And as the glow brightens, and the structure before them is about to make a sharp change in another direction, they come face to face with who it is that has been haunting them just out of sight this entire time. A familiar lantern glows with a dying flame that will not last much longer. They stare into the horrified expression they rarely see on a face they know all too well. The footprints they have seen and made all come back to them in memories not quite theirs anymore, and all but forgotten until confronted with in the cruel realization that this is not a new turn in the tunnels, but their terrifying first steps into the broken labyrinth they've been in for the gods only know how long. The adventurer stares at themselves and recalls the first thing they saw upon their mysterious entry into these ruins was themselves. They stood there to greet them into this fresh nightmare, already dead, frightening their own soul from their own body. The traveler watches their physical form collapse, and their soul weeps in agony over what they have done to themselves in this broken structure of time and physicality. Their moans are heard by a spirit far down the hall on another path, who mistakes their cries for a howling wind and takes their own confused steps forward towards a dying light just out of sight, around a far corner that strikes them as oddly familiar and increasingly strange. Now, the broken labyrinth and the stories around it are all influenced by a prison created quite early in Dzivian history. The prison was said to be carved out by the prisoners themselves after a time, all of whom were magically enchanted to literally work themselves to death in order to expand the structure. The empress under which this was built was highly magically inclined, so much to the point that Dzivia's practice of striking out our past empresses' names from history and not speaking them aloud, pretty much the beginning of the Extinction Keepers themselves, come from her. The new regime that came after feared even uttering her name again, thought that it might draw her spirit back for revenge. History text will say that after the completion of this structure, this prison, it was enchanted to teleport underground. A maze was built as a means of entertainment for the guards who were positioned there for life. It was a lifelong sentence to guard these, prisoners. It was meant to keep them entertained, which is a very cruel concept, but it's not surprising that wardens set to life to guard a prison would become cruel, as they are kept confined just as the prisoners are. Rumors go further to say that the maze held a chance for the prisoners to get outside. Perhaps not just outside into Zivia either, but outside into the neighbouring lands of Martina or Hostwin or even Vinthkar. The guards set the strongest prisoners free in the teleporting maze and promised that one of them, the first one to reach the end and only the one that reached the end first, would be free to go wherever they came out at. These are the focal points of the stories around the prison and what is commonly referred to as the Broken Labyrinth. But in reality, the only historical evidence of the Broken Labyrinth stems from this magically infused architecture of unknown ruins that apparates and disappears in the worst of the Dzivian storms. It's not a solid structure, and it itself is more of a rumor in our history than an actual fact. Thus, the Broken Labyrinth is just a bit of folklore. Nobody here should be too worried about finding it. We here in Maddrift have never seen it, and likely never will. But it made for a briefly entertaining read this evening at least. And with all of that said, have a wonderful evening, Maddrift. We will now stop the recording and replay it.